Excellent. Welcome to Using Data for Decision Making and Programming. We can hear the Arabic translation, so if that could be sorted, thank you very much. My name is Inés Arévalo. I'm a co-author of the State of Economic Inclusion Report 2021 and consultant at the Partnership for Economic Inclusion. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be moderating this session, which is different from any other sessions that you may have attended in the last couple of days, in that we really want you to engage and be hands-on. But before we go into the contents of today's session, I'd like to go through some very quick housekeeping. So as you may have seen from earlier sessions, we'll be providing interpretation into English, Spanish, French, and Arabic. So please use the globe icon at the bottom to select your appropriate language. And if you have any issues connecting to the audio or selecting the appropriate language, please let us know and our IT team will assist you. Please also use the chat box to share questions, comments as they come up through the session, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. As you may have also seen in other sessions, we'll be using Mentimeter, an interactive tool to ask you questions throughout the session. And last but not least, if you may want to change the view of the window, there is on the top right-hand side of the screen, there is a view button. You can select different options there. Excellent. So I'll now move on to an initial presentation I want to give you before we move into our exercise for today and our experts' experiences. So this session will provide a deep dive into the PI data tools that are available and that you can explore to see what's up there in the economic inclusion domain and how this data can be used to inform program design. We'll be going through the portal very briefly to then move on to the group activity and then bring our experts to share their experiences and reflections on open access data and using data to inform programming. So let me introduce you to our experts today. We've got Boban, who's an economist at the World Bank, focusing on livelihoods, social safety nets, and delivery systems. He's currently working with the governments of Zambia and Malawi to implement 2 flagship economic inclusion programs. He's also a co-author of the State of Economic Inclusion Report 2021. Welcome, Boban. We also have Valentina Barca, who's a social protection expert with a focus on delivery and integrated information systems. She's currently the team leader for the social protection approaches to COVID-19 expert advice space service hosted by FCDO, GIZ, and DFAT. Welcome, Valentina. So now I'd like to briefly introduce the data portal, which provides access to the data that underpins the State of Economic Inclusion report. Actually, the 2 surveys whose data is available through the data portal are the core of chapters 3, 4, and 6 of the State of Economic Inclusion report. So the landscape survey currently maps 219 programs across 75 countries, and the costing survey captures costing data from 34 programs in 25 countries. So the data that we collected for the State of Economic Inclusion report was then uploaded onto the data portal, and you can visualize this data through the landscape dashboard, the costing dashboard, and these 2 dashboards present aggregate results from these 2 surveys, and then the program fact sheets, which provide program level data that was captured through the landscape survey. As you see, the landscape data and the costing tool are available upon request, and I'll tell you where you need to go to access that. Today, we are actually sharing the link through the chat box that you can use to download the landscape data. So this is what you see when you go onto this link, and I'm actually going to move us there. Can you see the data portal?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. So let me just briefly walk you through the data portal. So this is the landing page. This is where you can contact us if you want to say submit or update data, if you want to have a report an error or provide feedback, any query that you have, you can just contact us there. Then you've got the different parts that I just introduced you to. So you've got the landscape dashboard, which summarizes data from the landscape survey. When you land on the overview, but then you can go into the different sections of the survey. So for example, here, coverage and context, you see the coverage of program economic inclusion programs, which programs operate in FCD contexts. And you can actually use these filters to say, for example, look at data by region, by country, or by entry point, which is the foundational a programmatic intervention that gives way to the economic inclusion program, and so on and so forth. And you can just use different filters, go to the different sections. Then also on the landscape, you've got the program database, which gives you, as I mentioned, program level data that was captured through the survey. You can use this link, or you can, I like using the PDF link because it takes you to a different tab and you don't lose that main tab. And you see here the summary of each one of the programs that is captured through the landscape survey. And you'll be exploring this in more detail. So later during the exercise, I don't want to go there now. Then you also have the costing dashboard, which is very similar to the landscape dashboard in its overall structure. You've got different sections that you can use to explore the data, and you also have different filters as well. So I'd like to just get a sense before we move on to the exercise. I'd like to get a sense of how many of you have used the data portal before. Don't worry if you haven't, because you will today. So if you could, if we could launch Zoom 1, please.
Yes, in a second.
So how have you engaged with PEI's data portal to date? Have you reviewed landscape or costing dashboards? Have you reviewed or downloaded program fact sheets? Have you provided landscape survey data or provided costing survey data? Or maybe you have not visited PEI data portal page before. So please share your responses. Can we start getting the results, please?
Yes, in a second.
Okay, so some of you have reviewed the dashboards. A lot of you haven't visited the portal. Well, I hope today is then very, very useful for you, and in the sense that you'll become familiar with the resources that we have in the data portal. Excellent. So without further ado, I want us to move on to the next, which is our group activity. So we want to make it a very practical exercise. So imagine you're an advisor to a government who plans to strengthen the livelihood development component of a cash plus or safety net plus program in Uganda. The main question is, what can you learn through the data portal that will help you start thinking about this? And so what we want you is, we are gonna create groups, and we're gonna ask you to go into the different groups, and I'll explain how that works in a minute. Once you are in the group, the first thing that we'll ask you to do is select a group representative. That person will be asked to respond some questions through Menti after the group exercise. And then we'll ask you to individually or as a group go into the data portal that I just showed you and start exploring data. Then we want you to discuss amongst the group the following questions. So the first is rank of the resources that I've showed you, the landscape dashboard, costing dashboard, program database, or the landscape database, which you think are most useful for this exercise to understand how a safety net plus program may strengthen its livelihood component. The second question is which filters have you used to explore the data? And I give here different options. And then the third question is, what are some of the insights that the portal can give you to start thinking about this scenario? You'll have 15 minutes for this activity. We have posted the instructions on the chat box, so please download the instructions before you go into the group. We also send them to those of you who had registered for this session beforehand, but the best thing to do is to download it and download the instructions through the chat from the chat box. Let me just carry on and give you a little bit more information about this group activity. So the logistics around it. So we have created breakout rooms. So when you click on the breakout icon, you'll see the different groups that are available. We have created 2 for Spanish, 2 for French, and 8 for English. The ideal would be that there is a maximum of 6 to 8 people in each group. So please select accordingly. If you are in a group and need to change, you can go back to that menu and self-select to another group. If you have any questions or problems, you can actually opt to leave the room. You'll see at the bottom of the screen the option to leave the room. Don't leave the meeting, just the room. And only do so if you've got a language issue that you haven't selected the appropriate room. And then, as I said, please select the group representative. Will be coming to you to solve any questions that may arise, and just go into the data portal and start exploring the data. So, but first, please download the instructions and go into the groups. We'll come to assist you in a minute. Well, welcome back. I hope that was a fun experience. Yeah, probably you've been a little bit overwhelmed. There is a lot of data, and that's a good sign. So if you were overwhelmed because of that, in a way, it's not that bad. We just wanted to give you a sense of what's there. So I'm gonna launch the 2 Menti. So let's start with Menti 2, please. Start sharing Menti 2. And if I may ask the reps from each of the groups to provide your answers to the question, please rank what PI data portal resources would be most useful to explore for this scenario. So simply tell me, so what are the resources that you used in the past 15 minutes as you were trying to explore the data portal and get a sense for how a cash transfer program could be enhanced through a livelihood component. So I see some even use the landscape database, that landscape dashboard, costing dashboard. Okay. Yes, thank you. Please go to menti.com and enter the code 60993551. Excellent. Okay, and let's move on to the next Menti question, please. Menti 3. So again, go to menti.com and use the code 60993551. So what filters have you used to explore the data? Country so far? Anyone else? Give it a bit more time. Excellent. So I see you've been using different ones. Fantastic. That's great. Okay, so then stop sharing results. I quickly want to go through the data portal and tell you some of the resources that I would have used to start thinking about how a cash transfer program may be enhanced through a livelihood development component. in Uganda. So the first thing I would do is to go to the landscape dashboard. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So, and here I mentioned earlier, you can filter and by country, and I will go to Uganda here. And then what I see is that there are only 10 programs in Uganda. So perhaps to look at the landscape dashboard, it would be more useful to go by region, just to have more programs in the sample. And so I go to Sub-Saharan Africa because there might be some regional characteristics that are common and applicable to Uganda. And so what I see here, there are over 100 programs. I can see that there is a focus on rural areas and a lot of like different, not national interventions, but more like regional programs. Then I could go into the objectives tab within the landscape dashboard to get a sense of, so what is the focus of the programs that are existing. So a lot of like self-employment rather than wage employment, a lot of focus on the extreme poor, and many programs focus on female beneficiaries. Then I could also go into program design to get a sense of, so what on average, what are the number of core components that are part of economic inclusion programs operating in this region? And then I could also get a sense of what are the core components that conform that economic inclusion package, that plus element. Lastly, I could also look at the institutional arrangements and see that, for example, we've heard this over the last couple of days during the GLE, that often programs leverage existing platforms to deliver some of the components. And we see, for example, here in Sub-Saharan Africa, that there is a strong reliance on informal community groups as well as local governance groups. So that the landscape would give you that sort of bird's eye view of what's out there. What are other programs in the region doing on the economic inclusion front? Then I would probably want to go to the program database and see actually what specific programs are in Uganda. And because I'm particularly interested in the livelihood component, perhaps I would use the primary entry point to see what are the programs whose core intervention is a livelihood development intervention. And I see here there are 6 programs. I see a range of organizations. These are some of the core NGOs and partners that are implementing economic inclusion programs in Uganda. And I could go into one of them, like I would actually spend time and go through them all. But if you go to one of them, you can see, so what are their focus? It can help you think of, could they be a potential partner? Is their focus aligned with our program? You could see what are some of the components that they already have. You could see also what are the institutional arrangements, whether they have any research that they've shared that could be useful for me as a reference. Then going back to the data portal, I could also go into the costing dashboard, but I'm gonna stop here because I want to bring now Boban. I'm gonna stop sharing. I want Boban to share his experience using this type of data to inform his programs. Boban, over to you. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Inés, and thanks a lot to everyone for being there. So yeah, I'll quickly, so in the context of Zambia, and I speak specifically on Zambia because that's where I've actually used this data much more actively than in other places. But the specific question that we had, and this was not a question from the government side, but more from within the bank, colleagues, was and this was in the context of preparing an additional financing for the GEWEL project, the Girls' Education and Women's Livelihood project that has a big component on livelihoods. Is this program effective? And what kind of evidence do you have to kind of say that this program should be financed? So the starting point for us was, when we kind of prepared that note, we basically prepared a 10-page note to look at this program in more detail. Our starting point was to first set the context and say that this is not the first country where you are actually, we're planning to implement this, there's 92 million beneficiaries to this program already. So, and it's being implemented across the globe in many different contexts, a lot of which is, both, it's a lot of which is NGOs, but then there's also country governments that are implementing this as well. So that was, one of the starting point for us to kind of say that, this is being done elsewhere too. We then kind of looked at what's the impact of these kind of programs, and for that we looked at literature. But the big question that came back to us is, these programs seem to be really expensive because they bring together different components. And for that, and this was being prepared just before this costing survey had been done, and this new version of the report had been done. So we had a bit of a difficulty then because we didn't know where to look for data. Lots of impact evaluations don't actually give costing data, and they don't break it up as well. So we basically, used whatever was available from the impact literature to then, figure out what the cost could be in the context of Zambia. And then we did some customization within Zambia as well to see what would this program cost to basically, to implement in the context of Zambia. And then using that, we then kind of did like a returns on investment calculation, and got very detailed analysis done, and made a very specific case for why this is a worthy investment, even though it may seem like it's expensive. And then we tried to look at other ways to kind of save costs, and those are discussions that we had later on as well. All this to say basically that when we then kind of started working on this particular report, and one of the focus was on costing to get that data, and the idea is basically that you can I mean, it's only on 34 countries at the 34 programs at the moment, but you can use the overall data on cost for these these calculations of return on investment. But then I think the idea is, once you look at the landscape survey, you look at where does your program or what you intend to do kind of fit in. What are some of the good programs that look like the programs that you want to set up, or you want to whether it's with government or as an NGO. How much would it cost to do that? Because that is, I mean, that's a big question that comes up, because that determines both the scale of the program as well as which components to kind of focus on, and how many components do most of these programs usually have. So basic information, and these are not, as I was saying, it's very basic, but the idea is that you can kind of get a sense of what is everybody else doing and how much does it cost, and do more more specific analysis if you need to. Yeah, I think that's that's just in a very in a nutshell, like how we kind of use this data, at least in Zambia, in the case of the GEWEL project, to convince management that this program makes sense, it's cost effective, and is a program worth kind of investing in going forward. Back to you, Inés.
Thank you so much, Boban. That was great. So now I'd like to move on to Valentina, to have you, Valentina, share your reflections on the value of open access data in general, and the data portal in particular, and what role data has for evidence-based programming. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm coming at this as a data user, and I'm probably preaching to the converted here, especially given the role of COVID-19 over the past year. I think every single one of us has been staring at dashboards and looking at comparative data across countries in terms of how we're doing and faring, and rates and vaccination rates. And so it's even kind of more persuasive the case right now than it might have been a year ago. And what I want to drill in is sort of three key reasons why dashboards such as this one are so important. And number one, and this reason is actually particularly important for this dashboard, is the myth busting and demystifying. So we hold many deep set myths and beliefs around things, and economic inclusion programming is definitely an area where we have each and every one of us has our prejudices, maybe based on experience just in one country and one context. And one of these might be the lack of state capacity to be doing kind of more complex programming, layering different elements, and that the fact that more complicated layered programming can only be done at small scale. And what the data is very clearly showing is that actually there's a wide variety of governments that are leading and showing the way on this and supporting people at scale. There's, Boban mentioned this, the kind of a lot of reticence and worry around the tag price associated with some of these more complex approaches, kind of not just the cash, but everything else that might sit around it. And the fact that this is therefore completely unviable for low middle income countries. And what the data shows is that those costs aren't necessarily that high, that they actually range very widely across countries depending on the components that are being supported. And you can also drill deeper into what are the drivers of those costs, and sort of that digging is a really important part of the process. We have myths around the fact that, oh, these types of programs are just for the ultra poor, the extreme poor. They're not really relevant within a broader national social protection strategy that's more inclusive. And again, the data kind of just having this comparative overview helps to demystify that. And this brings to the second point. So I've talked about myth busting. The second is inspiring us and informing those design choices in a more objective way. And data and the information behind it is useless unless it's being interrogated, unless we're going deeper to answer specific questions. And I've just mentioned this, that the kind of drilling in. So what this portal has shown us, and the brief 15 minutes you just spent has sort of been an initial touch point for this, is it can help to understand what other countries are doing, how are they doing it, what about countries in the same region with similar contexts facing similar constraints. You can start doing that process of digging deeper. What have been the drivers of costs for them? How have they been keeping costs down? And obviously the data is just a starting point. It sort of gives us those initial pieces of information. You saw from Inés that you can also, within the country descriptions, you can also go and find additional links to further information. But it might even be the starting point of a conversation with another country in terms of going deeper into what they've been doing and how they've been doing it, and that more qualitative, nuanced information that obviously data alone will not be giving you. And that brings me to the third point, which is having this objective overview can trigger more of this South-South dialogue, knowing who are the actors who are playing what role and where, and ultimately supporting us in a process also of benchmarking, understanding where we as a country and we as program implementers sit compared to others. And this here, this is where the process and the methodology is almost as important as the data itself. So we are all not just data consumers, but also data producers. And that the fact that PAI has helped to develop a common framing, a common understanding of what are the main features that we want to be comparing each other against, I think, I mean, maybe to me, one of the most important pieces of the puzzle is exactly the costing framework and methodology. This is very difficult to nail, but it's fundamental to actually be comparing across and really getting a sense of value for money. So that process of you going through that submission and sort of thinking about your programming systematically will actually ultimately be important in terms of benchmarking how you're doing compared to others, and kind of slowly shifting things in country as well. And ultimately, this is about building on the shoulders of giants and us becoming giants for others in that process. And that's what kind of these types of dashboards have done for other sectors. And it's great to see this now from PAI. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Valentina. That was super insightful. And I really like how you highlighted that this is a starting point. This doesn't have all the data, but it's it's a path, sort of like an avenue to additional information, and a starting point to help you start thinking about how you may want to design or implement your program. So that was great, and I also like your point about how it can also be used for internal learning. And we've actually heard this from other users, that it's helped them systematize their own internal knowledge about the programs that they are supporting. So thank you very much. We've got a few minutes for Q&A. And while we continue to hopefully hear from our audience, I'd like to start us off with a question, brief reflections from you, Valentina and Boban. So, as you mentioned, Valentina, these type of resources. So we are users, but also producers of data, and the data portal will only be relevant if we continue to have up-to-date information on the programs that are out there at the moment. And so this requires that program managers or staff put some time, efforts into providing data from their programs to feed into the portal. So my question is, what would be your elevator speech to convince busy program staff of the value of providing and using data from PEI's data portal? If we may start with Valentina, over to you.
Well, elevator pitch is a bit much, but definitely, I mean, I'd reinforce that point that going through that process of actually kind of collecting and consolidating that data will be incredibly useful for you internally, but it will also help you to understand other people's data better and help to interrogate what others are doing kind of with more clarity. And this is, always the case when we're talking about data. Just it's like you only understand something when you're teaching it. It's the same concept. So hopefully this process will be helpful for all of you. Over.
Thank you. Boban? Okay.
Thanks a lot, Inés. No, I would actually say, it actually does not take very long to do this survey. And as long as you kind of so if you have a budget for costing, right? If you have a budget sheet, it's an easy, you find someone who can do this, and it could be someone in your team. If it's government colleagues, it could be someone at the bank who's working with you. It could be the PEI team. So reach out to people here, the PEIs particularly, and they can help you do it. So you just have to give them like a fact sheet of what the program is, give them some, your budget data. That's it, and it's an easy process. So it shouldn't take you that long, even though it does seem like it may take long.
If I can just add a really quick point to that, is that process of going through, I mean, I'm trusting you that it doesn't take too long, but it will also help to highlight for you what are other missing dimensions that you might want to see more of within the portal. Again, I mean, it's being designed to be useful to users, and I can already see some comments on there that touch on that. So back over to you, Inés.
Yeah, no, super helpful. So actually, we have a few minutes to launch one more Menti, which actually will touch upon some of the questions that have come through the chat box. So can we launch Menti 4, please? So just to let you know, we launched the data portal last summer, and we feel that in a way we are still in beta phase, and we are looking to enhance the data portal. So this is my chance to get feedback from you, having just experienced a little bit what resources we have available through the portal. So based on your understanding and experience to date, what additional resources do you think would be useful to have in PEI's data portal? So please go on to menti.com and use the code provided 609935551, and just tell us what you think could be useful in addition to what already is there. So someone mentioned filters around the rural-urban distinction, in addition to the region and country. Let me see if there is any other. Anyway, so just we are thinking of perhaps filters on different target groups. So just give us your thoughts. And I think the more we use this portal, the more we realize what else we need to know. So I also invite you to keep in touch with us through through the data portal contact form and give us your thoughts on what else could be missing. I'm gonna give it a few more minutes. And for those of you who've said other, if you could kindly write what that would be in the chat box, that would be great. In the meantime, I'm gonna just Valentina and Boban just share a couple of questions that have come through the chat box. So the first, can we integrate monitoring and impact evaluation data? Perhaps you can share your thoughts on that. And while you think about that question, so can we integrate monitoring and impact evaluation data? There are a couple of other questions that have come through on how why they wouldn't, some of you couldn't download the landscape data, and so so that should be available through the link that we shared. And if you have problems, it seems that you had problems, please reach out to us through PIDP for data portal at worldbank.org. I will share that through the chat box, and we'll make sure that you have access to the landscape database. And apologies that you couldn't find a way to download it through the link that we provided. So Boban and Valentina, if I could ask you to come for like 30 seconds to comment on how we can integrate monitoring and impact evaluation data, that would be great. Thank you.
Sounds good. Should I go first?
Yes, please, Boban.
Okay, no, I would say I think that's a good idea. I think it would make sense to kind of bring in, you know, whatever literature there is on impact evaluations, and, you know, just even use the existing charts in the report to kind of produce one more tab with impact evaluation data, because I think that's something that's, you know, it's important to look at impact and cost at the same time. It may not be the same program, so, you know, it does kind of reduce the, you know, usefulness of using it in that sense. On the monitoring data, I think I personally think it's a little tougher because, you know, every government has different, or every program has different monitoring data dashboards, different purposes. So that could become a little more complicated. But I think, you know, I think Inés and team has also, you know, you may be kind of thinking about this, but like bringing in gray literature, you know, about, you know, and some of this could include, you know, reports from monitoring evaluation, just to kind of give a sense of, you know, what else is happening, how these programs are performing. So I think if possible, that would be great, but it's complicated for sure.
Thanks, Valentina. Any additional thoughts on integrating impact and monitoring data?
Not much to add. I agree with Boban absolutely. The only thing I would add is that I found helpful and in other similar, again, dashboards, to have a section which is almost a knowledge management section, exactly that consolidates all the literature on that topic, sort of tagged thematically, and I saw that you had the links to the additional literature within each program, but having that function is also helpful. But I absolutely agreed on the impact side.
Excellent, thank you. And perhaps I allow myself to add something. So yesterday, if you attended the evidence session in the morning, one of the speakers said we need more short-term data that sort of predicts what the changes that need to happen to have that sort of data along, you know, sort of in the longer term. So having key indicators in your monitoring data that sort of allow you to identify what needs to happen to achieve the impact that you want at the end of the program is also a useful way of linking your sort of shorter term monitoring data with your longer term impact evaluation. Excellent. So we don't have much time, so I just want to thank you all for participating today, and I invite you to continue to explore the data portal. We want to hear from you, your thoughts on the session. So we'll be launching a very brief survey questionnaire to just hear from you in an anonymous way what you thought of this session. And I hope you continue to enjoy the remaining of the GLE. Please look at the chat box for the link to the next session, which will come up in about 4 minutes. So you've got time to complete the survey and possibly go for a healthy break. Thank you so much.